All right, I want to go over Hardy-Weinberg. I am going to do a separate lecture that shows you how to do Hardy-Weinberg problems. I think they're important to understand how to do them. But so Hardy-Weinberg are two scientists that came up with how do we test whether a species is evolving or not. So they basically came up with what we call the Hardy-Weinberg Equilibrium, assuming that a population is not evolving. They should follow certain characteristics and they should be able to plug them into certain formulas if they're not evolving. So if it follows a Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, a population is not evolving. If it doesn't follow Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, a population is evolving. So they came up with sort of a negative test that says, all right, if it follows our formulas, it's not evolving. If it doesn't, it is. All right, so they describe a population that is not evolving. All right, so in a real population, things are changing. So here's a way to test whether things are changing using this Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. All right, so there are 5 conditions that have to be met for non-evolving populations, and these are very rare in nature that you would have a population that's not evolving. But these, all 5 have to be met in order to fit the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And so they are. There's no mutations. Obviously, if there's mutations, it's bringing change, and then something could survive better than others. We know that with bacteria. There has to be random mating. So what that means is that you are randomly mating with other individuals. Again, this rarely happens in nature. Birds. Some birds are choosing, female birds are choosing a male bird because they like their song or they like their feathers. That's not random. They are picking a trait that they like. We do that as humans. We don't just randomly mate with whoever we bump into. We pick traits and are hopefully a little more selective as to who we like to mate with. So that is not, typically species don't do random mating, okay? But so if there's non-random mating like we usually do, we're picking traits that we like, and those are the traits that get passed on. That's part of natural selection. Some traits get passed on better than others. But in random mating, it's just random. So there's no trait that gets picked better than others. No natural selection. Obviously, if there's natural selection happening, then populations are evolving. All right. There has to be an extremely large population size. When you have a very small population, changes can occur very quickly, as we saw with genetic drift. So in order for no evolution to occur, there has to be an extremely large population size. All right. And last, there's no gene flow. So no alleles enter or leave a population. Okay. So all of these have to be met in order for a population not to evolve. Again, this is rarely met in nature. All right. That typically does not happen. But these are the conditions for Hardy-Weinberg. So there is also a formula that goes along with the Hardy-Weinberg, and there's actually 2 formulas. So again, they represent a population that's not evolving. They are going to stay the same over time. All right. And so here is 2 equations that you're going to need to know. The first one is here. P plus Q equals 1. P represents the frequency of the dominant allele, and Q represents the frequency of the recessive allele. When you add up the frequency of the dominant and the frequency of the recessive allele, they should equal 1. All right, so in a population, when you add those together, you should get 1. So if I did frequency is 80%, show the dominant allele, or have the dominant allele, 20% have the recessive allele, that's 80 and 20 equal 100%. All right, so they should equal 1. All right, the second here is, so these are the frequencies of the alleles. So a big R or a little r, the frequency of those. The frequency of alleles in the genotypes of the population represents this. So these are genotypes. So this is the frequency here of basically homozygous dominant. All right, so if P represents the dominant allele, if you have 2 of them, big R, do you see how that becomes P squared? Because it's 2 big R's together. This is the frequency of the heterozygous genotypes. All All right, and I'm going to show you why it's 2pq. So this is the dominant and the recessive, so like big R, little r. And then this one is the recessive, homozygous recessive. Because if Q represents the recessive allele, then little r is like Q squared. Okay, so I'll show you how we get that. So if I have big R, little r times big R, little r, here I have big R. So this is my P squared. Here I have big R, little r, and here I have big R, little r. So my heterozygous, you see why we have to do 2pq? Because there's two of them when I cross them. All right, so I have P squared, which is up here, plus 2pq plus the little r is the Q squared. And that will equal 100% of the population. So this represents the genotypes. And this other one, P plus Q is 1, equal the alleles themselves. All right, so we're going to be doing a lot with these two formulas. All right, I'm going to show you how to do problems with these two formulas. And we're going to be doing some labs on them and all kinds of different things to practice, because I think Hardy-Weinberg is a pretty important concept to get. All right, so I'm going to do a different example of problems here in a little bit.